So in this video I'm going to be talking about how to manually handle your bike and get some more confidence while you do it. Throughout the video I'm going to be using my Triumph Tiger 800XC, which in its current state it's got a full tank of fuel. It weighs about 500 pounds, so 230 kilos there or thereabouts. When it's fully loaded up with all the luggage it's about 600 pounds. So I've got some disadvantages myself pushing this bike around. Even though I'm tall, the bike is also much taller than a standard bike as well, because it's raised up, it's got bar risers on it, so it reduces my reach to the bars as well. So I'm going to talk about a few techniques that are going to make it a lot easier for you to push your bike around, whether you've been riding for a while and you struggle with it, or whether you're preparing for your Mod 1, which includes some manual handling elements. This video should give you some tips and tricks that will help you out. If you're new here, my name's Sarah. I post motorcycle related content on YouTube every Friday. If you like what you see, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button down below. Check back next week for more new content. So, let's move to an area with a little bit more space and I'll start to show you a few of these techniques. So before we start, I'd just like to say that these are the techniques that work for me. My particular bike are on very wet grass today as well. It's very soft and very slippery. So I'm going to show you the techniques that I use to move my bike around. Over time you'll probably develop your own nuances on how you want to do it yourself, which is fine. There isn't a right and a wrong way, but I want to give you a few hints and tips that should help you along your way, especially if you're a new rider and you're just getting started and you're a little bit daunted by the weight of bikes, whether it's a small bike or a big bike. So the next thing to say is this bike weighs an awful lot more than I do. Like I said in the intro, this bike weighs 500 pounds in its current state, about 230 kilos. That's a lot more than I weigh. Therefore, there is no way I'm going to fight this thing when I'm trying to move it around. If when you're moving your bike you're struggling with weight and you feel like the bike is in control of you, then you need to change your technique. Ultimately, you shouldn't be fighting it. It's easy to say, less easy to put into practice, especially if you're a new rider and you're a little bit nervous. Before we start moving the bike around, I'm going to show you a couple of techniques that will help build your confidence in handling your bike and understanding where its balance point is. When you're moving a bike around, you have two options really. One is you can move it around on its balance point, so effectively the bike weighs nothing, and that'll work in some situations and it won't work in others. Your other option is to lean the bike against your body, either to the left or to the right, depending on which side you're standing, so that the weight of the bike is against your hip, and you then use both hands on handlebars to steer the bike and push the bike around. Again, that technique's also perfectly legitimate and may work in some situations and not in others, so it's a good idea to practice both methods of moving the bike around, whether that's moving it forwards or moving it backwards. Wherever possible, I try to move my bike on the balance point because it's very heavy. I don't want to fight its weight. The one thing I would strongly discourage anyone from doing is sitting on their bike and paddling it, especially if you're paddling backwards because you can't see where you're going, but also if you can't flat foot your bike. I can't flat foot this, I can just get my tiptoes down on both sides. It's too dangerous. You're more likely to drop your bike if you're sat on it and paddling it, if you can only get one foot or the tiptoes of both feet down, than you are standing next to it. It can also be dangerous to paddle your bike because if you do lose your balance and slip, you can easily end up with the bike landing on your leg or on top of you, which is not ideal. At least if you're standing next to it and you do slip and you do fall, you've got time to get out of the way of the bike falling over. The other thing I should say is if you are going to practice these techniques and you are new and you're a little bit unsure, please get someone to come with you and stand maybe on the other side of the bike so that they're ready. If you do have a little bit of a wobble and you go to drop your bike, they may be able to catch it. But I will say, regardless of how experienced you are, if you do slip and your bike does start to go, it will get very quickly to a point of no return, and bikes are heavy, you're not going to stop it. the best thing to do is let it go over. It's not an easy thing to do, and the natural reaction is to try and save it. But the best thing to do is let it go over. The chances of you straining your body, whether it's your upper body or lower body and your back, if you try and catch a falling bike, is very high. So after that long intro, let's talk about getting confident and handling the bike. And I said my preference is to push the bike around on its balance point wherever I can. Whether I'm on this side of it, whether I'm on the right hand side of it, I try to use the balance point as much as I can. And understanding that balance point will make you a lot more confident when you are pushing your bike around. The first thing we're going to do is just lift it off the side stand and get used to that weight. So you've got two options depending on how strong you are. One is to just lift it, or you can lean into the seat and use your body weight and your legs to help lift it off the side stand. So you want to just practice lifting the bike off the side stand and getting it to an upright position before you start doing anything else. Figure out a technique that works for you. It may be that you want to do it with both hands on the handlebars and use your hip to give the bike a bit of a push. You might be strong enough to just lift it off the side stand. Whatever works for you. There is no right or wrong way of doing that, and it will wholly depend on how much bike weight and how strong you are. So the next thing to do is get used to the bike on its balance point. And at its balance point, the bike doesn't weigh anything. All the weight of the bike is down on the tyres, and the amount of effort and energy that you need to put in to keep the bike upright is tiny. So to do that, you want to just pick the bike up off its side stand, straighten the handlebars out, and find that point where the bike just wants to stand up on its own, which is there. So at some point the bike will weigh absolutely nothing, and it will take no energy from you to keep it upright. The bike's not going to fall over immediately if it's on its balance point. Eventually it will. Eventually it will get to a point where it will wobble and want to fall over. But there is a point where the bike effectively doesn't weigh anything. And what you want to do is get used to picking your bike up off its stand so it's at its balance point. Because at that point it's easiest to move. All the energy that you need to put in to move the bike is just in its forward or backward motion. You're not putting any effort in to holding that bike upright anymore. What you're going to do now is you're going to pick the bike up to its balance point that you've found and got used to. Kick the side stand up so it's out of the way, so you're not going to trip over it. And then with one hand and one hand only at a time on the bike, is just get used to moving around the bike. Just walk around the bike using the lightest touch possible to keep that bike upright. And you can do this hanging onto your screen. Just going to move around the bike. If you have a little bit of a wobble, just stop, get the bike back on its balance point, and move to your next point. And we're just going to keep going around the bike, holding it there at its balance point. And like I said, if you have a little bit of a wobble, just stop before you move on to the next point. So you just want to practice that a few times, just going around the bike in different directions, getting hold of different parts of the bike. Because there might be times when you're out riding that you need to be in an awkward position on your bike and just hold it. I can hold this up with my thumb, just one thumb. So you want to just practice that and get used to feeling where that balance point is on the bike, where the bike actually weighs nothing and just wants to stand up on its own. The key to this, like a lot of bike stuff, is be relaxed. If you're tense, every little tiny movement that your body makes will be amplified, and if the bike does get a little bit off balance, it'll push you over. Once you've got a feel for how the bike feels at that balance point and finding that balance point, then we can start to move on to actually pushing the bike around. So now you've mastered picking your bike up off the side stand, finding that balance point, understanding it, and being able to move around the bike and keep it in balance all the time with the minimum amount of input. Now we're ready to start pushing the bike around. The first thing we're going to do is always kick the side stand up. You don't want it in the way, especially if you're on this side of the bike. You trip over it and it really hurts, and then you're going to drop your bike. And the first thing we're going to talk about is just pushing the bike forwards. Now I'm going to do this at the neutral balance point. Your other option is to just lean the bike very slightly against your hip. Don't lean it right over like this, because that's just hard work. Now I'm having to put a lot of energy in keeping the bike up. Find that neutral balance point and bring it just onto your hip, so it's just resting there. I'm not putting a huge amount of energy into keeping the bike upright, even though it's slightly off balance this way. My preference is to use the neutral balance point. I'm going to use that neutral balance point, or that point that's just resting on our hip. Both hands on the handlebars. Cover the front brake so we've got some brake control. And we'll just use our weight to push the bike forward. Do that again from this side. So we'll take the bike off the side stand, kick the side stand up, either lean it against our hip very slightly, or use that neutral balance point where the bike doesn't take any energy to keep it upright, and then just push. Look where you want to go, and use the front brake to just bring the bike to a nice controlled stop. Now you want to practice moving the bike forward from both sides of the bike. So if you're standing on the right hand side, you can't put the side stand up, so make sure where you're moving is clear. Lift the bike up off the side stand, either lean it against you or use that neutral balance point. Look where you want to go and just push the bike forward. Use the front brake to stop it. Before you drop it down onto the side stand, make sure that stand is still down and put it down. Let's do moving backwards in a straight line. Moving backwards, you don't have any control of the front brake, so you just need to be a little bit more careful. You can, if you wish, put it into first gear and use the clutch as your brake. So that means you'll have to hold the clutch in to move the bike. But if you're moving around on a slope, I highly recommend doing that. If you're on flat ground that's nice and solid and stable, then you may not need to do that. But otherwise, use the clutch as your brake by putting the bike in first gear, pull it in, and then if you need to stop, just let the clutch out and the bike will come to a stop. So move the bike backwards, we're going to do the same thing. Lift it up off the side stand, get your stand up out of the way. I'm going to use one hand on the bars to steer it, one hand on the back, and then we'll use our body and just push that bike back, looking where we want to go and making any corrections with the steering as we need to. Just do that again from the other side. So pick the bike up, put the side stand up, straighten the bars out if they're turned. One hand on the bars, one hand on the back of the bike. You can use the pillion seat. If you want the grab rail, the frame, your side panniers, whatever you want to use, you just need something to put this hand on. And then we're just going to look where we want to go and push the bike backwards. We're done. Just going to stop, pop the side stand down. Again, practice that from both sides. But again, when you're on the right hand side, you're not going to be able to put the side stand up, so make sure the ground is unobstructed and you're not going to get it caught on anything. Let's talk about turning the bike while you're pushing it. So I'm going to take the bike off its stand. I'm going to push it back in a U-turn so it's facing the other way. So I'm going to pick the bike up off its side stand, get the stand up. I'm going to turn the handlebars to full lock and lean the bike against me a little bit. I'm going to have one hand on the back of the bike, one hand on the handlebars, and I'm going to use my weight. I'm going to look where I want to go, over my shoulder, and stand the bike up, and we're done. So if you need to turn the bike around when you're pushing it, you see how much width is required to do that. You're going to need enough space to work in. You can do it from the other side of the bike as well, but I don't have enough width to demonstrate it in my garden because I can't lean the bike. The other technique is turning going forwards, which is a little bit easier because you've got both hands on the handlebars. So practice your reverse turns in both directions. leaning the bike against you or using the neutral balance point, whichever works for you. So for a forward turn, it's going to be much the same. You take the bike off the side stand, put the side stand up, both hands on the handlebars, and then we're going to give the bike a push. I'm going to turn the handlebars. My garden's also up, and I'm having to lean the bike, so I'm using my body to do that. And there we are, back where we started before we did that reverse turn. So just to recap before we wrap this video up, get used to taking your bike on and off the side stand from both sides of the bike. Get used to finding that neutral balance point. Get used to walking around the bike. Use one hand, the minimum amount of effort that you can to keep that bike in balance. And after you've mastered that and you've got used to that balance point and feeling where it is, start to work on pushing the bike backwards and forwards in a straight line. Use the brake or the clutch to stop it if you're on a slope. Practice that from both sides of the bike. And once you've mastered moving the bike backwards and forwards in a straight line, start to link that together with turns. Whether the bike's leant against you or whether it's standing up at that balance point, your turns will be much tighter if it's leant against you and leant over a little bit, but be careful not to lean it too far. Like I said, the key with manual handling your bike is understanding that balance point and using it to your advantage. You don't want to be fighting the weight of the bike. It might be quite hard to get the bike moving sometimes. Like when I did the forward turn, it took me quite a lot of effort because the garden actually runs uphill from here. And the bike had sunk a little bit because it's so soft. So you will have to put effort into moving and stopping the bike, but you shouldn't really be putting any effort into holding it upright. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button down below. Leave us a comment below if there's any other tips and tricks videos that you would like to see in the future, and I'll make sure that I can put something together for you. In the meantime, get out on those bikes and enjoy them when the weather allows. Ride safe, and I'll see you again really soon.